Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Synergized, where I work to try to find people that you may not necessarily hear from on a regular basis, whose lives have touched many others in their careers and in their personal lives through a servant heart while working to transform and bring value beyond self. And people who have done just that in my life. And today I'm so pleased to introduce to you my good friend, Mr. Scott Orr, who lives in the state of Florida and whom I met through the John Maxwell leadership team in the certification program. Scott is going to bring you in this episode his wisdom, his experiences, lessons learned, and perhaps talk a little bit about, for he and I, we've shared a lot about this, how one can anchor themselves down and not allow their life story to move forward at times in their lives. My good friend Scott, thank you for taking time to join us today.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm honored to be on here. And I noticed that you use the term wisdom loosely when you talk to me. I'm looking forward to sharing a few ideas that I hopefully can add value to others.
Scott, you've brought a lot of wisdom for me, so I know it's not loosely used when I reference that word with Mr. Scott Orr. Scott, for our listeners and our viewers, why don't you walk through a bit about who Scott Orr is, who he has been, what you've done in your career, and then we'll get forward and discuss leadership more.
Well, Kevin, that's probably one of the toughest questions that you can ask me, to talk about myself, to talk about a career that some people would call successful, I call getting by. And my career all started really out of college when I went through a few bumps and bruises through the college time, where I was honored to be appointed to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. Spent a year there, but finding that wasn't really where I wanted to be at the time. I liked the discipline, but I felt like I was merging into someone else I didn't want to be, because I'm always a teacher at heart. So I did leave the Naval Academy. They asked me to leave because my heart wasn't in it and the grades weren't in it. So I left and then pursued a year and a half in the Navy, which I was obligated to do, which I thought was a good time for me to get my thoughts in order. From there, I did finish college locally in South Florida through a junior college, and then into Florida Atlantic University, where I got an education degree and started actually teaching right as I graduated. I was very fortunate because I was able to get a certification in mathematics, and that's what they needed at the time. I taught for 8 months, but then found another way as I entered the financial services field as a financial advisor with my father as a partner. And we started a partnership which was successful for 4 or 5 months before, unfortunately, he passed away. And I then took on the business for another 2.5 to 3 years before I really wanted to chase my education field and dream, which I did, and taught school for 2 years, really 2.5 years, in a local high school that I went to, but then moved on to a newer high school in Boca Raton, where I taught mathematics. Again, I'm a phys ed major, but taught mathematics. And I think I was fortunate enough to know how people would struggle with mathematics and tried to make it simpler. That's when I actually learned the subject, was when I started to teach it. From there, I also was a high school swimming coach, which is one of the most disciplined sports there is. It's a lot of pain and drudgery for the swimmers, but I tried to break it up, tried to make it fun, because I was once a swimmer and I disliked it because of the boredom. So I think it helped me in that coaching process. After getting a little bored and giving up, I went back into the financial services field and became a coordinator, a coach, helping advisors really learn to connect with their clients, learn to find out what it is, what they needed, and spent 5.5 years working with advisor and really helping them fulfill the needs of their clients. I then was promoted to a manager's job, which then I spent the next 30 years in that position, from local management to regional management and also to national management. And again, it was all about finding those advisors that I could add value to. After spending that 35 or really 37 years in the financial services industry, I found it was time that I do something else. So I officially retired out of the business. And now, since then, I've been looking for ways to add value to others and to get that fulfillment. It's no longer about chasing the money tree, even though probably would be better off if I was working now. It's finding a way that I can help others throughout their lifetime. We'll probably talk about one of the ideas that's in the works when I decide to take the initiative to go into it. That's enough of my life story. That's been a lot of pain for me to talk about that.
I can see there was a lot of sweat on your brow. You came across very calm, my good friend. So, Scott, talk a little bit. You made mention, and first of all, what a diverse background and career that you've had with your purpose in life. And while maybe the Naval Academy you recognize didn't pan to touch your purpose and the path God had laid out for you, I sense you had education in your heart from a very young age. It seems though through your time as an educator, even your time in the financial world, you've been educating, you've been training.
Yeah, I would say to anyone, especially at the high school and college arena, looking for a base of education that they should take, I firmly believe education is one of the best backgrounds anyone can get, because it's talking about helping and coaching and teaching others. To me, there's no better background that one could have to go into any career that they might choose with that education background. I think it all goes back to thinking about who are the teachers that I remember from 51 years ago. And I'm old. 51 years ago,
Nobody said that, Scott. Come on, it's
I did.
experience. It's a lifetime.
I graduated 51 years ago in high school, but I think back, there are teachers that made that impact on me that I remember to the very day. My fifth grade elementary school teacher in Pompano Beach Elementary, she was a person that cared about her students. She spent time every day reading books that expanded our horizons. One I'll never forget is Jesse Stewart's book, The Beatniks Boy and Hide to the Hunters, that she spent hours throughout the year reading that book to all of us. And that just made an impression, very much so. Then there was a math teacher, Mr. Hale, who took everything down to the basics and really was very animated and kept your attention. I learned a lot. And those are some of the people that made that impact with me to I want to emulate that, because it made an impact on my life.
Wow, great story, Scott. Thank you for that. You said a fifth grade teacher. I share a commonality there. The first male instructor I had in school in the 1960s was a male teacher at fifth grade, Mr. Ben Whittinghill, who I believe, if I remember right, came into education late, non-traditional, but he was the first instructor I had that really I felt like cared for me as an individual. Not that the other instructors and teachers I'd had in grades 1 through 4 didn't care about my educational growth, but for some reason, I don't know if it was the grandfatherly figure that he represented, Mr. Whittinghill worked to develop relationships. And it stands out to me as probably the first time I recognized that teacher-pupil opportunity can be productive and not one to where student fights the homework, teacher pushes to get homework done type of scenario. So I appreciate you sharing that. And as we go back in those young ages, Scott, I don't know about you, but I certainly wasn't mature enough to understand that I can learn through every opportunity with a teacher, with an administrator, in particular at the ages I was in elementary school and junior high school.
It's so true, Kevin. That impact, what made an impact when you can think about it 50 years ago or 5 decades ago, you remember it as it was yesterday. So that was the impact that they made on me that I was hoping, and my purpose was I was able to do throughout my lifetime. That's something I hope that I've done.
So Scott, you talked a little bit about you were an educator for a period of time, a PE teacher teaching math, and you got bored a little bit. Talk a little bit about that experience because we see a lot of shorter periods of time with employees with companies than we once did.
Yeah, it was nothing about boredom. I think it was economically
Mm.
at that time when I was ready to raise a family, and $32,000 a year salary as a teacher at the time was not one that you could live on, even back in the 80s. It was the pressure of having to make the extra money to live on or live a lifestyle that I was accustomed to. That was part of it. I wanted to find a way that I could still teach, but make a decent living. I found it in the financial services industry.
Good for you.
It was all about people. It was all about connecting with people, adding value, and living through their success. And I think that was the most rewarding part of my financial services career, is watching people grow and helping their clients build wealth.
Well, Scott, it certainly would seem like it was a positive transition that led to 30 plus year career in the financial services industry. Thinking back on that time frame, what's a lesson maybe you took away from the transition, moving from education into the financial services, the private sector, that you might offer to those who may be making transitions now in their careers or considering it for their future?
I think it's all about being comfortable with yourself and really finding out what people want and finding out what they want and helping them find it and helping them steer towards the areas that catches their interest, their passion. That was, I think, the easiest transition. And that's why I've always said, and what I looked for in my field was people that had an education background. Former teachers are great financial advisors because they're helping others, and that's in their DNA.
Wow, very well said. And one thing I want to build off of with what you just said, going back to what you said earlier, when you recognize that the U.S. Naval Academy wasn't for Scott Orr in that regard, you alluded to a bit that, and this is a positive, I think, very much so for anyone, Scott, especially at that age in their life, is how, if we're not careful, we can live a life that others have defined for us, or maybe by their judgments lead us into. I know I've been very guilty, and I failed a lot of times, maybe in careers and roles to where my development wasn't necessarily probably best aligned for the purpose in my life, where my heart wanted to be, where God wanted me to be, but yet priorities, company visions, other people's view of how things should be done, how in that row I should do things, maybe took over too much and really anchored my own growth. Talk a little bit about your experiences there.
I really think more about it as a failure. And what I learned from that is I didn't work hard enough. I didn't push through. And that helped me in my careers, sticking to it and pushing through and finding solutions. The solutions, whether it be in management, where the solution was, how do I reach this individual? How do I help this individual? Or how can I help this individual do what's right for the client? Pushing through and putting in the hours, which I, to this day, don't feel that I did that at the Naval Academy.
Scott, another thing you mentioned earlier, you recently in the last few years have decided and made the decision to step into the next phase of your life. Retirement is a word that probably is not as often utilized today as it once was, at least in my experiences, because there seems like we recognize, and I know you are one, and it's very near and dear to your heart that you want to be a servant and be there to help bring value to others. We talked about a transition you made in your career, moving from education to the financial services. Talk a bit about that transition, the contemplation, the decision-making process, and what led you to know that the time was right to take that step forward into this next phase that you've called retirement at this point.
Well, I think part of that decision was really kind of forced upon me at the time because of really where I've been at and the phase that I was in. I was given charge in 2019 to build a new office in an area that was very challenging in finding financial advisors to bring in to that firm. And COVID came out and kind of stopped everything. So being stopped at that time, it really was a sign that it was time that I pursue other interests where I know I can touch people and have that opportunity to do. So I'm learning that experienced retirement is not all what one would think. And that's something that I'm looking and passionate about, is finding ways to help others through this path that they've either chosen or it was forced upon them. Is how can I make an impact to help them find their purpose? And it doesn't matter the age, because we see so many people in the later years of their life making significant contributions to society.
Yeah, well said, my friend. And you certainly bring a vast amount of experience and knowledge, and you've been a positive impact to me, not only through your encouragement, but just in your abilities to see the big picture. If I can use that term, I know it's overused a lot, but to see the big picture and then to break it down further into those fragments maybe that we can more control. And I know we're going to wrap up this first episode, and fortunately Scott has agreed to stick around, and we're going to record another episode and build further from this point on topics such as self-awareness, bringing value to self, and adding value to others that Scott has experienced and where he would like to go. And I know he's going to talk a bit, as he and I have shared back and forth, we have a great deal in common from the standpoint that when there's an anchor that holds us back, we typically both look in the mirror and the finger comes this way, so to speak, or the fingers come right back at us. We're going to talk about that in the second episode. But Scott, before we wrap this episode up, you talked a bit about the importance of being comfortable in self. And if I have learned anything, I think I've learned it, because at this phase of life, when I reflect back now, I'm amazed at the way the fog's been removed, and I understand why things happened the way they did, why they were more successful than I ever dreamed of. I didn't understand at the time, or maybe why they weren't as successful. Things, projects, relationships, growth opportunities, etc. Why they weren't as successful and what my role was in holding those back. But talk a bit, because you and I both have talked in the many opportunities we've had. For full disclosure, Scott and I get together every 2 or 3 weeks, and we share where we are in our mission, our purpose, and then we bemoan and try to push and prod one another from the standpoint of, hey, here's some ideas on how we can continue to move in that regard. But Scott, a common theme that you and I have had in just about every segment that we've talked about that area is we've got to be comfortable with self and know self and be self-aware. Talk a little bit about the challenges you've had to face and overcome there before we wrap.
I think that the challenge has been with self-confidence and the ability to know that I've added value to others. It's the unknown that is the challenge for me. Did I help this person? Did I make a difference? Was it a positive difference or was it a negative difference? That's the self-talk that sometimes freezes me from pursuing or moving forward, because that really mantra of wanting to make that positive difference in others' lives, I don't want to feel like I'm failing all the time, but sometimes I feel that way, is that no, I didn't. What did I do today to make a positive difference in someone else's life? And that's something that I think will hold me back and freeze and not just keep pushing forward and being more intentional. I think that's what I've learned with the John Maxwell program, is really learning more about self, learning more about finding that way to add that difference and that value to others.
And Scott has so much value to bring. And my friend, it's a constant. Each time there's so much value that comes out. But I hope that you feel and sense the vulnerability. Scott opening up his heart and sharing his experiences and sharing where his struggles are at, perhaps, and finding that opportunity to bring value. We're going to build on this and we're going to talk more as we prepare for another episode with my good friend, Scott Orr. Scott, thank you so much for the words of wisdom and for sharing. And I look forward to our next episode we're going to record here in just a few moments.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you and all you're doing. And again, the value added that's out there, just a click away from many others.
Well, thank you, my friend. And for everyone that's had a chance to view or will view or listen to this podcast, Scott's there to serve, as I'm there to serve. We're going to get into the John Maxwell philosophy and talk more about self-awareness in the next episode with my good friend, Scott Orr. You've been listening to Leadership Synergized, where we can be still, yet move forward. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. I appreciate you. So long.
Thank you.